In fact, I want my pain to be inflicted on others. I want no one to escape.
Welcome to FusionPit Presents. I'm Alec.
I'm Charlie.
And I'm Chad. What's up?
And we're basically here to talk with Chad about the music industry of today and of the past. Basically doing comparisons and asking his opinions on what he thinks is true metal, false metal, and everything in between. So let's start off with talking about your past experiences with past shows and comparing them to maybe some things you've seen today.
Then, as opposed to now, I think they meant it back then. Nowadays, music is, contrived, and nowadays, I don't know, it's really hard to put an opinion on that, but there's a lot of bands out there that I know are a lot better than what the records they're putting out. I know that a lot of these bands have it in them to play what they really want to play instead of having a record label telling them what to do. And a lot of bands having nowadays to tour to make the money that they need because the record labels and the business have kind of fallen through the floor. At least that's how I see things.
So you would say that nowadays record labels are not as worried about the music as they are the money?
No, because it's, like I said, they're relying on bands to tour more. I mean, back then, there were bands that, you know, they had 9-to-5 jobs, but they still had the desire to play honest music, or at least music that was honest to themselves. And, you know, every band established their following, and it's just really, it's kind of hard for me to answer this one right now. I just think that it's a whole different story nowadays. People nowadays are doing it because they have to, as opposed to wanting to, like back when I was playing shows and going to shows and whatnot. Nowadays the industry is just too contrived and the music suffers for it.
So how would you compare bands nowadays that are mostly just pumping out albums as compared to bands like Death when they were put time and energy into the album? Do you think they're too worried about the visual of the album over the audio and how it sounds and makes people feel, or do you think they're not putting any emotion into it at all and just hoping for cash?
I think there are bands that are often put under pressure by the label, and there's actually several bands that I like that are capable of taking that pressure and walking into a studio. A death metal band per se, as Immolation, they do the same thing. They walk into a studio because they have a deadline to meet, and they're a band that can perform under pressure. And you know, as opposed to a band like Death, Chuck being an old friend, he was able to take things that he saw in life, and he had the time to reflect those things. And he wasn't really pressed by a timeline with the label he was on, and he was able to put everything he had into every song. But like I said, bands like Immolation, they're the epitome of being able to work, you know, with grace under pressure. They go in the studio with you know, a couple of weeks to write an album and record an album, and they fucking handle it.
So what would be the worst case that you've heard or seen coming from a band nowadays that you just think, dear Lord, this is not what they call metal anymore?
The worst case scenario is a band that rushes things, pure and simple. You can't get a legit record if you rush it. You got to have the time and you got to have the desire. You can't just walk in, you know, well, with the exception of a few bands, you can't just really walk in there and wing it.
Have any questions, Charlie?
Not really at the moment. I'm kind of just bouncing off, trying to come up with ideas as you guys are going.
Okay. So let's talk about not really a definition, but how you would describe true metal.
True metal is, you know, it encompasses a lot of things. Most of it is the desire in which to continue doing so, I think, and not being pressured by some record label guy, you know, crawling up your ass telling you what the people want to hear. To me, that's not honesty, that's contrived music. When a band allows themselves to not play what they desire, then they're not being legit or honest.
All right, so Chad, what are your favorite bands?
Wow. I mean, without specifying genres, there's a lot of them. I'll have to stay. I'll stick with my oldies but goodies. As far as like my older bands are concerned, of course, Deep Purple. Gotta love the Mach 2 lineup. That is the shit. Old Judas Priest, before they were ever called metal. Old Iron Maiden, of course. Sabbath, Zeppelin, Robin Trower, stuff like that. But as far as like, I mean, I grew up listening to punk. I grew up listening to everything, really, even soul music. But as far as favorite bands, I love my old German thrash. I'm all about Creator, Sodom, Destruction, that type of stuff. Even though they're not a German band, but Celtic Frost, the old stuff. Morbid Tales, stuff of that nature. I still find myself listening to that music. To me, it's like listening to Hendrix. It's timeless like that. It's always going to make you happy. You never get tired of it. It's like listening to an obituary, like an older obituary record. You always love it. It'll never do you wrong. Bands that are still doing it and still doing it for me, Immolation, Incantation, these guys right here fucking rule. Pretty much a lot of the older bands that are still doing it today, I will support. You have favorites tend to change, every week. You have a favorite new band every week. Last week my favorite band was Dark Throne, or this week it's Immortal. But it changes all the time, and it can be any genre. So that's how I see it.
So I want to actually go off on something you said, because I noticed you said earlier obituary. So how do you feel about current obituary and bands like 6 Feet Under?
Well, Chris, I don't know what you did, bro, but you fucking quit Cannibal Corpse and you just fucked everything up. Actually, I just saw Obituary not too long ago, and they dropped Hammers. Their new, I'm not familiar with their new record, but I did hear some of it live. I liked it. They still crush skulls. They will always be Obituary. And they don't compromise. And to me, going back to an earlier question about bands being honest, to me, a band that's honest is a band that doesn't compromise for shit. They will always play what they feel like playing. None of this, you'll always see Obituary and bands like that do what they've always been doing, and that's putting out great records.
All right. Now, let's say you were talking to someone who was just getting into the metal scene. Who would you recommend to help them ease into it, or would you have them just go straight?
How
Or just dive head in?
baby steps in like that genre is pretty difficult to achieve without, it's almost like don't jump in feet first. You have to jump in almost head first. There's no real easing somebody into metal. It's not possible. I mean, you could show them like the first Metallica record. That'll work. I mean, that's probably the only real feasible way I could see easing somebody into metal, or at least like speed metal or whatnot. If it was death metal, I would show them Death, Scream Bloody Gore or Leprosy, or I would show them the album Symphonies of Sickness by Carcass. And that right there, that album alone spawned over 1,000 bands. So once everybody heard that record, it was crazy. A lot of the old Swedish stuff from the 90s was good too, like Entombed and their album Left Hand Path. That album, in my eyes, is one of the bricks in the Golden Brick Road. That's definitely a classic, and if I'm going to wean anybody into that heavy of music, it'll be, I guess, with the classics.
How about some black metal starters?
I would definitely be telling them to listen to older Dark Throne stuff, Under a Funeral Moon, the album Hate Them. That's a fucking great record. Listen to Death Crush by Mayhem, or De Mastrias Dam Satanas. That's a great record. Anything by Immortal. The list goes on. There's so many great bands. Satyricon, Nemesis Divina, in my opinion, one of the best black metal albums ever written.
All right, so Chad, what were your earlier influence? What was your kind of inspiration to get into music?
My mother. My mom blasted on her stereo literally Motown, Deep Purple, Sabbath, Elvis, Johnny Cash, everything. My mom is the reason why I am so musically insane. She pumped a lot of music in my head. I mean, I grew up listening to so many bands, and it really taught me diversity. So that's something that I'll always take with me, and I've always tried to maintain that attitude and outlook on music.
So, who would you say was your favorite performer back in those days?
Which days?
Your earlier careers, like back in the Bay.
Well, I know when I was a kid, the first badass I ever saw was James Brown. If that counts. I mean, he was a pimp. He's the godfather of soul. This ain't all about metal, is it?
Nope.
I mean, I remember seeing like Journey and seeing AC/DC open up for Kiss, and going to see Black Sabbath and Van Halen, and just I had my mom and I had my biker uncles taking me to shows all the time. It was normal to go, especially living in the Bay and around the Bay. You were really spoiled because there were so many acts that came through the area, and when you're coming through the Bay, you had to put out a good show because the Bay is a fickle mistress, and you're from that point you're privileged and privy to greatness, because everybody that rolled through were badasses. It was such a diverse melting pot of music. There was no real classification for it. I just knew I was seeing good music all the time.
So let's go back to those Van Halen, Black Sabbath.
Kiss, AC/DC, back all that.
See, I know a guy at work. We're going to call him Roy because I don't remember his name.
We'll call him Roy.
We'll call him Roy. And him and I were having a debate, and he told me that
Oh boy.
music nowadays is not indebted to music back then. So things like, I don't know, Fallujah and some other metal bands like Faceless and... Why am I blanking on names all of a sudden?
Because they're bands I don't know.
Probably. Goat Whore, we're going to go with Goat Whore. I know you
Okay,
know them.
Right.
But they are in no way indebted to bands like Black Sabbath, Van Halen, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. He's basically saying...
All of those bands should be indebted to bands such as Sabbath and Priest and Blue Cheer and Deep Purple and that whole gamut. To claim to not have any of that influence is absurd. Period.
So you think you don't agree with him in any way when he says
No, I do
music
not.
today has nothing to do with music way back when?
Whoever said this is a fool. I'm
I
sorry,
agree.
but that just doesn't work for me. And anybody in their right frame of mind would agree.
Because I remember getting into it with him. He said, even if we didn't have Iron Maiden, even if we didn't have Pantera, we'd still have the bands we have today.
Nope.
And I was like,
What?
What?
Godsmack? I don't want to be stuck with that shit.
so would you call them your least favorite act then?
No, they're one of those contrived bands I spoke of earlier.
So then, who would you say, what was the worst show you've ever been to? Like, ever.
That's a broad question. There's a lot of, oh man, I could make a top 25 list right now.
Let's go with it.
I'm not going with it. It's not worth the time. That's why they sucked in the first place. I don't know. There's been a few stinkers, but I don't know. I'm always disappointed with festivals, especially here in the States. They just don't know how to do it here yet. Here it's all about money. You go overseas to Europe and it's a whole nother ball game. There's the passion is on a totally different level. So you're never going to see a bad festival show over there as opposed to over here where it's contrived.
It seems to be, that is Metal Chad's word of the day, contrived.
Because it fits. I can't, where else am I going to go with it? It's the only thing that fits right now,
So, you would say that Europe's
That the Eastern Hemisphere of the world has more of
has a better
a better way of
doing things
releasing music.
than the States do.
Well, they also have a lot of bands over there that, unfortunately don't tour the States. So their bread and butter is the summer session, the summer season of festivals. And that's where it's going on. You're in for a good ride every time. You're not going to be let down.
So I know you've worked festivals here, and I believe you've told me you've worked festivals up in Europe. Is that correct?
I worked for a band. Yeah, I worked for Testament for a minute.
So how would you compare the festivals here compared to festivals outside of the States? Like quality of the bands, quality of the production, things like that.
Tours in this, like festivals in the States, require a lot more money. Bands over there cater to the fans, not the promoters. It's a kind of a different ballgame. It's hard for me to put put an answer to this question because I'm not quite as savvy on the business level. I mean, I was more or less humping equipment, but it's just a completely different attitude in terms of, I have a friend that handles that whole business perspective, and he tells me things every once in a while, and it's basically a headache to do stuff here, as to where over in Europe it's just seemingly easier.
Well, I mean, I've heard a lot of things. I know that right now Europe definitely has a better music scene when it comes to the more hardcore genres. And I feel like the States is more pandering to
Whatever will get them out.
rap and hip hop and whatever's going to pay the most. What's your opinion on statements like that?
On bands wanting to be paid the most,
Yeah.
being greedy, it's unfortunate. You're kind of screwing over the fan at that point. I know everybody's got bills to pay, but at the end of the day, it's the fan that makes you. And you have to appeal to them, and you have to appease them. It can be a fickle mistress.
Now I've got one more for you. I know a lot of people who they have this state of mind where supporting a local band is not important. They feel like, oh, I shouldn't have to spend my money to go see this band when I can save up and go see a big band. And the way I feel is, you know, people forget that supporting that local band is what makes them a bigger band and able to go places.
That's right.
So, what do you think about that kind of mindset?
It sucks. You people that have that attitude are fucking lame. And, you know, support your local bands if hopefully they're good. But, you know, I mean, still, I mean, I've had friends that were in bands, and to be honest with you, I didn't think they were that good, but I still supported them and what they did because I was their friend, and that's what we do.
All right, and on that note, I'm Alec.
I'm Charlie.
Stay metal.
Stay metal.
Later!